Whakatakata hau ki te uru, whakatakata hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hi aki ana te ātakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei Māori ora. So a very good welcome to you all. Whoops, that's for the end. We're not doing that just yet. Sorry, just stop. I need to stop sharing. Thank you for coming along. Just a few housekeeping matters before we start. We'd love to see your faces if you want to participate in that way. We can have you asking questions around Deb's presentation shortly. Meanwhile, please make use of the chat. We have Karen Bessel-Hayes, who's also on the PLD committee for ANZIA, who will be monitoring your chat throughout the presentation, and then we'll be talking after Deb's presentation. We'll discuss those questions and give Deb a chance to respond. I've asked Elena, my colleague, along to talk to you a little bit about what we're going to talk today about and who Deb is. So welcome, Elena.
All right, kia ora koutou. I can see lots of familiar faces and names, but for those who don't know me, I am Elena Moretti. I am a Director of Engagement and Impact here at the Education Evaluation Centre Te Ihuwaka within the Education Review Office. So that basically means that I've got an evaluation mobilisation role. I have had the pleasure of working with both Ruth and Deb for several years now, and it is my absolute honour to introduce her and what we're going to be talking about today. It's always kind of fun to delve into what people did before I knew them. So this has actually been a great exercise for me too. So let me tell you that Deborah is a senior manager in Te Ihuwaka. She has over 20 years of experience as a researcher and evaluator and has held positions in academia, contract research centres and government in both the UK and New Zealand. This won't be surprising when you hear her accent. Deborah has a passion for applied research using her expertise in quantitative and qualitative methods to provide real-time evidence and solutions to pressing problems. She is deeply committed to the ethics of research and evaluation, particularly around ensuring that historically underserved groups aren't further disadvantaged by the research process. So we'll hear about that today. Deb's PhD study focused on the 2023 English riots. Riots are stigmatising for communities. She had to reconcile how to provide rich case study findings while maintaining the anonymity of the communities and the people involved. So it's a really tricky area. She went on to write a book chapter about this ethical research dilemma, which I highly recommend. So today, Deb's going to share her journey of establishing an ethics review process for this research centre. This initiative was a collaborative effort with tools and guidance being developed and finalised as part of a pilot. The pilot was conducted amidst real-life challenges of a bustling research environment. I can vouch for that, including staff sickness and relentless project deadlines. So this is a real-life solution. Deb will focus on how she has navigated these obstacles and worked closely with colleagues to foster support and buy-in for the ethics review process, and will also share some valuable and tangible insights and lessons learned along the way. So with no further ado, I'm going to introduce and hand over to Deb. Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou. You can probably hear my Northern English tones. They've been trying to tone them down over the years, so hopefully you can understand what I'm saying. Ruth convinced me that there would be an interest in hearing about setting up the ethics review process. So surprised to see so many of you join me. Thank you. I kind of value the time you've given to this. I'll share a presentation I've got. They're not kind of hugely detailed slides, but hopefully they'll help you kind of digest what I've got. Let me just try and work out how to do that.
It's a button at the bottom.
It is. As always, as a researcher, I've got that many tabs open. It's hard to find one. There we go. Share. Share from the beginning.
Kia ora.
Okay, so there we go. So a bit of an overview of what I'll be covering, basically why bother with an ethics review process, where to begin, a little bit about the pilot and socializing the process, and then I'll kind of circle back, I'll kind of come on to impact. So why bother with an ethics review process? And I say that as a genuine question because those that have been involved with ethics reviews before in a range of settings will know they can be often very lengthy, can take many months, be kind of frustrating at times. And being in an agency where we didn't have an ethics review panel, you could think we're getting off lightly. But we obviously know that the real value of them is to avoid harm, at the very least, to participants and researchers. And importantly, they protect the agency's reputation. And given the uptake of ERO's research by ministers, a major ethical concern would really impact the work that we do. I also think for many of us, just preserving scientific integrity is really kind of important. And for me, as part of that introduction, kind of ethical research is a passion for me, but it also maintains trust in public trust in research, whether it's ERO doing it or anyone else, and with a real passion for evidence-based policy, we wouldn't want to undermine it. And I have kind of in the circle of people working in Te Ihuwaka, we have researchers that kind of take pride in their work, and kind of that ethics review process is part of knowing that they're doing things right. And we also have lots of new researchers that join us that might have never engaged, they join as grads, they might have done bits of research in the uni context, but actually builds their capability to kind of have a deeper understanding of what we do and how to do it well. So that was kind of the push. And we did, not to say we had no ethics process, but we kind of didn't have a full ethics panel that would review it. We would have a kind of a lighter touch as part of our scoping. So this was kind of really upping the game on what we did. Where to begin? As always, building on the shoulders of giants, I looked at what we do already. We did have some guides around ethics. I looked at what I could steal from elsewhere. So having worked at Victoria University in the past, I had some old ethics forms that I could look at. But I also, in trying to make this a fit for purpose process, university ones are very kind of in-depth and really cover a lot of the methods and not just the ethics. And we cover that at Te Ihuwaka in a process around scoping. And so it was trying to kind of split out some of the what's often done in an ethics review process. And so I also went back to the basics. It's like going back to, and being a bit of a nerd, going back to things like the Nuremberg Code and other kind of ethics review, other principles and guides that have developed over the time. And I'll come back and say a little bit about using those in socializing the process. So I've kind of came up with some tools, having drawn from the ones that I've managed to beg, steal and borrow, and slim them down to what I thought was going to be fit for purpose, but believed very strongly in action research and didn't want to put out the tools or any guidance without piloting them first. And so looked to trial them. We had 2 projects requiring ethics review at that point, and wanted to kind of have buy-in from those in the pilot. So kind of sought some volunteers really to be the guinea pig panel members. And I have to say, I would have been keen for any volunteers, but we ended up with 4 senior evaluators that were the ones that I would have chosen myself. They have great respect within the centre and as some of our more experienced evaluators. And that was actually, ended up being really valuable I think, for getting buy-in to the process later on. I'll say more about that as well shortly. And to be clear that this was a genuine commitment to refining the tools and the guidance, and so that many minds making better work was a strong commitment. And I talk about those real world challenges because just as we were about to begin the trial, the 2 of the 3 panel members, 2 of us that were going to be involved in these panels became sick with COVID. And so on my sick bed, I didn't want to let this fail at the first hurdle. So I managed to, on the moments where I was feeling vaguely compos mentis, I managed to kind of get a little bit more guidance out, but missed the training session that I'd planned. And so fortunately, the kind of the senior evaluators involved was really critical at the point because they didn't need to be got up to speed on the role of ethics in the process. So I really kind of lent into their existing skills and experience. Provided what I could via email, and a lot of those initial kind of stages kind of really rested on the guidance that I provided through that and the experience. So really and true to an action research, we'd done that planning, we got the tools, we did the put into kind of action, but and then came through to the reflection, where I did meetings separately with those that had been involved as panel members and those that had been involved in project teams, kind of on the receiving end of the ethics panel kind of pilot, to kind of get different perspectives on what went well and what didn't go so well, and what could be tweaked. So what did we find? Well, I think what we found that even though I tried to right size the application form, and within the application form, I had to say I provided kind of tailored guidance for the kind of work that we do, and I managed to kind of flesh that integrate that into the different fields for the applicant to fill in. So trying to make it as easy as possible. The deadlines that we work to are often pressing because we are feeding in ERO, like some of you might be as well feeding into decision making by the ministry or the minister. So they're not that flexible. And so trying to make this process both robust but also right size was critical. So getting that guidance into the application form in the right space to cover the efficiencies. But we removed some of them because that was the feedback. Did we need to kind of ask about our engagement with commissioners? Well, actually, often those things are already signed off. If we're working with the ministry, the project team really has little kind of control over that. So taking stuff out that the project team genuinely has no control over made sense. And there were a few things left around that we pulled out. And because we have huge kind of scoping packs that really detail the methodology, we didn't really need to cover that in so much detail in the application form again, but we still needed enough for the panel to get an overview of the purpose of the project and the overall methods. So again, we kind of tailored the guidance. This is the kind of the feedback that came through from the pilot panel group and also the pilot project teams that went through the process. Now, I'm sure many of you have been through this process, might have felt that those on panels use it as a bit of a time to show their expertise. I've certainly had ethics review forms back where someone's given me some little prompts on what I could do and what I might do, but probably not necessarily in the direct field of ethics, but kind of sharing maybe some of their expertise kind of more widely. And that's kind of still to be celebrated. But what I realized is that if we really had that much feedback on the forms that it was going to take weeks to get through, we would be compromising our project deadlines. And I was also worried it could be the nail in the coffin of the ethics review process, using a panel and the kind of tools that I'd initially developed. So we kind of gave guidance to panel members in future that we can put lots of feedback within the form, but we would have a template that would identify what would be major and minor ethical issues. And that would be the real kind of content of discussion between the team and the panel. So it kind of wasn't about nitpicking, but it was genuinely about protection of participants and researchers, and obviously the protection of reputation and societal protection from any kind of societal harm. And a question like, what's a major issue and what's a minor issue? So I kind of had to tangle with kind of defining that so we at least would be broadly on the same page. So those major issues would be things that fundamentally affect participant welfare within the context of informed consent, legal compliance, things like that. And I provided some guidance. And then we had those minor issues, which would still be a problem for ethics, which would be more technical or procedural, but maybe around wording issues in consent forms, lack of detail on recruitment or withdrawal processes, things like unclear data handling or anonymization procedures. And that, I think, as it's been used kind of afterwards, has been a real gain because it enabled us to kind of really focus in on the review meeting on those things and leave those kind of nice to have comments that are still important, but nice to have like in the application form for project teams to deal with separately. The real value of this is that in going through the ethics review, we acknowledged that lots of issues that were, well, not lots, but some of key issues that were coming up, we weren't really for the project teams to deal with on their own. They were centre-wide issues and needed to be raised and dealt with almost at as a centre-wide level. And so there's a space for that in the template so that we can kind of separate out what the project team has control over. And we really had to put into the guidance this additional step to socialise the ethics review with all field workers. As part of the review, part of the pilot, we realised that, those involved in the ethics review process have really digested much of what needs to be taken on. But however it works in other agencies, often here, because we're doing a lot of field work, all in a short space of time, we bring in field workers from other projects to support us. And it's making sure that it's an explicit step in the guidance that all those field workers are kind of updated and informed about the things that have been discussed and agreed as part of the ethics process. So it seems like an obvious step, but unless it's written in there, it can easily get missed out. So these are just like some of the things in the kind of action research that we were turning round after the first project, rolling them into the piloting in the second project. And, actually I'll go on to say that we've been refining them as we've gone on into further projects since. And I have to say, we still see it as an ongoing pilot because there's this real commitment to ongoing refinement. So socializing the process, it was important that I felt it was important, and I think it worked well, that we socialized the new process in an all of team meeting. This means all of the centre. So we've got our most senior leaders there. We've got our people who were involved in the pilot, and then everyone that will be using it. And I think having the most senior members there who might be less involved in the process itself was critical to show that this had the support of everyone. And this wasn't just something that was a bit of a tag on at any point. Having the pilot participants contributing in that session from my perspective, was critical, because though that kind of gave some credence to the things that had emerged, where they could see that those experienced senior evaluators that had been involved in the process were behind it and had been involved and made decisions, that it wasn't just me in a room in isolation. And of course, with any good kind of digesting of a new process, we had some interactive activities where people could reflect on their own previous experience and could engage with the new tools. You know, perhaps it could have been a bit longer, that session, and I think there might be a need to have others, but I think it was a good start in socializing the process. And this is where I kind of did lean into the nerd that exists in many researchers, of kind of talking a bit about the evolution of ethics review processes. And, you know, in the feedback after that session, the thing that quite a few of our kind of maybe less experienced researchers came up and spoke to me about was they liked to hear about the unfortunate experiment that I referred to in New Zealand, which was, as many of you might already know, or whether or not you do, of a cervical screening study at Auckland Hospital, that was highly unethical and led to serious harm, but was actually a point at which there was a review and kind of really did lead to some changes in kind of ethics processes here in New Zealand. And so it was kind of showing that what we were doing was kind of building on a longer history. And whilst we're unlikely to create the kind of harm that happened in that experiment, I think the nerdiness, many of us kind of leaning back on those things that have happened in the past was quite important for getting buy-in to the process. Having a genuine question and answer session was helpful, again, with that commitment to ongoing Q&A and refinement, was something that we talked about, well, I've talked about with people after the session. So, I mean, this is something I'm happy to share more widely afterwards, but I think it's kind of quite critical to have some very easy steps for people to follow. And so there's a process for project teams, and then I have kind of a stepped process for the panel members, which is all part of right-sizing it. So that isn't something that someone has to read very lengthy guidance, but being clear. Actually, in my process for this centre, we decided to put a lot more of the effort with the project teams, that they would be the ones that would set up the ethics review meeting. They would email the application. They would, they would start the process, you know, when they would start the process, and that we would provide not just the guidance, but we would provide some exemplars. And again, that step at the end around socializing it. So there's this kind of process that they can see, and we've got guidance that sits behind it. I had to, in using these exemplars though, because we'd been refining the template, that we realized in a more recent ethics review that in using one of the exemplars, not fully copy and paste, but like drawing on what had been used for a previous project, that it meant they'd used an older version of the template. So that was another lesson that we'd learned along the way, and provided a bit more guidance around that. And then the process for panel members. Now, often our seniors and principal evaluators are the ones that are kind of exceptionally busy, and we want to draw on their expertise, but we don't want to burden them too much. So as I said, the project team will pick up a lot of the administrative burden. And then there's this clear process of review, agree, the collective feedback. I think that's critical. I don't know if any of you have been involved in ethics processes where you've received conflicting feedback from an ethics panel on what to do to get to kind of get it approved. So we do make sure that we've got a collective agreement before we share that with the project team. And that's the stuff that goes in the template that gets shared on. everything really is focused in that ethics review meeting, so that we don't have this back and forth over weeks. And in the pilot, we actually have found that that's worked quite well, with that template that focuses on the major and the kind of minor issues that we can triage and make sure that we can get out in the field without very lengthy processes. Obviously, there will still be some kind of need to review changes after the ethics review meeting. But following the pilot and kind of having real kind of robust discussions with those involved about, depending on the size of the project and the complexity of it, that we can get this down to like half to a 1 work day per panel member. And we feel quite confident in that, but we're always open within the centre to kind of keep reviewing that to make sure that it doesn't get blown out of proportion. And that's the point of still seeing it as a very collaborative process. What I wanted to kind of focus in on is the impact that I think it's kind of having, which is important if you're going to start a process like this. In creating an ethics process, you need to know that there's some benefit. As I said, I was worried that if it was blown out of proportion, it could be the nail on the coffin and we'd go back to a kind of much more basic approach. But are we avoiding harm for participants and researchers? I'll come on to give some tangible examples, but I would think that already we've done some of that. Protecting the agency's reputation, yes, in the short time that we've had this going. Preserving scientific integrity could probably do with a project in and of itself, but I'm going to give that a tick. I'll give something a bit more tangible as well shortly. I've definitely heard from members of staff who've been involved in this process that they feel kind of greater pride in their work, that they're more confident going out there, that everybody involved in the project kind of understands how to avoid harm, but not just how to avoid harm. There's but there's a real focus, as there should always be in an ethics process, of like, how can we maximize the benefit for the people involved? And this process has really driven conversations around that otherwise would get very easily kind of sidelined in the need to get things done quickly. A real kind of impact has been improving, is not reinventing the wheel every time for every project. That actually, if we've worked through an ethical dilemma in a previous project, that we've kind of captured that and we kind of save the templates and the conclusions of an ethics review on our intranet that can be accessed. And so we've got a building of organizational memory that almost gives us bang for our buck on the ethics process. And in terms of what are we doing differently, because there was potentially a situation where we'd implemented a process and we might have got greater pride in our work, but actually we weren't doing anything too differently. And this is not to kind of say we were doing things badly before. We've got incredibly experienced people in ERO. But things like driving those conversations around whether students that we work with a lot are really volunteers, or are they voluntold to attend focus groups? So having conversations around tangible processes and conversations we'll have with students at the start, and how we might navigate those complexities in the time we're there of someone who has been voluntold. Do we send them out? Do we let them sit nicely in the room? We've been having these conversations will have been had lots of times before, but we capture in this so we can pick that up in with other projects that come online. Our consent forms are potentially becoming much more consistent across projects in a beneficial way. And one of the things that I'd kind of, it connects down to another bullet point on this slide, is around that compliance with legal and policy documents. So obviously the OIA does kind of really need to be taken on board when we're having research participants who are based in in the public service, to what extent we really can commit to confidentiality and anonymity. So we've really been having conversations centre-wide around those things to make sure that we're catching ourselves before we come across a situation where we've guaranteed confidentiality and anonymity, and then an OIA request would actually require us to divulge the name of a public servant. It's very different to some of our other participants, but we're able to have those open conversations with participants in advance now. And things that we've tangled with in relation through the more kind of recent reviews have even taken us into looking at things like the Defamation Act, you know, when we've all got our heads together around things that normally just a single project team would be dealing with, around whether when we're working with commercial agencies as participants, do we need to worry about the Defamation Act and actually how ERO could be held to account for negative findings in relation to small businesses. So these are things that might come up in project teams, but we're collating them and having kind of robust conversations as a consequence of the setting this up. And doing this together kind of collaboratively, and even with those kind of those hurdles around sickness and around tight project deadlines, I think brought us together around these issues. And I don't think it's a process that anybody feels has been done to them. And so even, with the continuing pressures around getting things done quickly and getting out into the field, that back and forth around specific issues, there's a real buy-in to that. And hopefully that will continue. Oops, is that my final slide? Have I jumped out? Yeah. So I didn't want to take up too much time on my presentation because I think it's always better when we can have that dialogue. If anybody has got questions that they want to raise, then happy to.
Thank you so much, Deborah. That is some really, really practical process-oriented slides for us, but very useful commentary about what lessons you learnt on the way through. So congratulations on the undertaking of the exercise. And we've got 4 questions, in fact, in the chat. Dr. Ruler in the room. So maybe we could work our way through those questions as a starter. The first one's, what would be a trigger for an ethics review?
Yeah. Shall I stop sharing so we can see everyone's faces?
Sure.
Is that? Yeah, we go.
Sure.
So the ethics review for us now is part and parcel of every project that we do. So we'll do our kind of high-level scoping for a project. We'll do our more detailed scoping of a project where we will kind of think obviously around the methods and start to think around the ethics. And it's in the setup of that detailed scoping that we will, for every single project now, have an ethics review. And obviously less complex projects or projects, will might be very quick, but obviously we have some where we really have to tangle. So the trigger is every project.
Excellent. Okay. And the next question, if there are concerns, how do you socialize that with those involved in the project without undermining their mana?
Yeah, well, I think it probably helps already, I think, to have a culture of learning and no wrong question. So I think we generally have that. I do think it is still an issue that we should all take seriously, that how we tangle with ethical dilemmas, especially in that meeting, is really important. And I didn't dwell on it in the presentation, but to note that because we are seeing that every senior and principal evaluator will be on bank to be part of the panel, that to make sure that that those individuals involved in the panel do have some kind of training and guidance around it in advance. And we have started to bring some more junior members in to kind of bring them into the growth space. But it means, therefore, in those meetings that, there probably does require some kind of softer skills development around how to engage on tricky issues. But I do think because we're generally kind of collegial, it's helped. And in many ways, therefore, I do think the value of an internal review process means you do have relationships already. Sometimes an external review panel can kind of come in and not know the people they're speaking to and not have an understanding of who and what might be triggering for an individual. And so in many ways, therefore, I'd argue there are benefits of the process that we have internally in that particular field of the question of maintaining manner.
Sure. Rula, I must congratulate Rula on these excellent questions. There's another 2 questions from Rula. The third one, how do you run an ethic review in an environment experiencing a rapid use of AI as assisting tools by researchers and lack of regulations and organizational statements around that? It's a big question that we're all grappling with in our agencies, I think.
Yes, I mean, I have to say it's not something that we've had to grapple with specifically in any of our ethics reviews yet. We're having conversations in meetings separately. And I think what we will learn from that probably will need to then kind of funnel through to the ethics panel. Certainly. And I think it's probably quite helpful that when he funnels through, it's in the specifics of a project, because like you say, it's such a big issue. If we try to deal with it on a just how do we deal with this generally, it might be unwieldy, but in the context of specific projects, we know who our participants are, we know who will be likely to be impacted by the ways that we do the research, but also by the findings that we produce. And I think it can make maybe some of those conversations around AI much more tangible and feel more manageable. So I can't offer too many solutions other than having a focus at a project level is probably going to be helpful, but we'll have to bring into that the wider conversations that have been had within our agencies around policies and processes.
And then the final question here about consent. Where do you place the organisation's ability to provide sight translation or fully translated consents whenever needed to participants who do not speak English? How informed consent is assessed in that case? So a specific question for you. That's also
It's interesting you say that, because that in the template that we've developed for the ethics review, and we basically take this kind of template takes people through a range of categories, including accessibility, informed consent, but also accessibility, and whether we're both in the recruitment but in the data collection processes, what we're doing is accessible and inclusive for all. Again, I think it comes down to the specific project, whether we're likely to be engaging with groups that need English, that need kind of accessible formats. And I don't think that's just language either. It could be the way that we make them accessible for people that may have visual issues, or I don't know, there's the range of things that they might need. And so we are having those conversations in the context of each individual ethics review. And so where it's needed, and we have done projects before we've had this full ethics panel set up around diversity, where we've had those conversations and we can go back and with the organisational memory and the people still in the office, bring those conversations into the ethics panel. So whilst we'll have 3 people on every ethics panel that will be rotating, because it's internal, we can draw on the expertise within the wider centre. And I think that's another benefit of having an ethics review within a centre, where we've got people that can be brought in with expertise around individual issues. So yeah, it's something that every team is encouraged to consider whether things need to be translated or not. And certainly if we're working in Māori medium schools, then we're looking in our projects around the need to have things translated into Reo Māori. But of course, where we'll be engaging with others, there's no way it would get through our ethics review panel now without having conversations around that, because the guidance is specific to consider it.
We've got one more minute left for a question from, I think I can see Margaret waving. Go ahead, Margaret. Would you like to?
Kia ora. Thank you so much, Deborah. That was really interesting to hear. I come from an independent researcher background, and prior to that, I used to be at Manaki Whenua Landcare Research, where my colleague, who's sitting here somewhere invisibly, developed a ethics for the social researchers within the organisation, because we didn't have one. And I find that the process that you're talking about and the way you're talking about it really interesting, because to me, ethics and complexity has to be project-based. It has to be with the people who are involved in the project. And so that abstracted idea that universities have had for a long time, you do your ethics proposal to get it past the ethics committee, as if that's a bunch of things that once you've ticked them off, that's all done and dusted. Whereas you're talking about, and Dr. Rula has raised some questions there, which are really complex, and you're not going to be able to get all of that sorted in a single moment with an ethics proposal run past a committee. So the idea of having living ethics that kind of works with the project as you're developing and raising questions, I think it's a huge capacity development potential for it. So that wasn't really a question. That was just a, hey, great, thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. And I think one of the things that we have found and we've built into the guidance that I didn't say is actually, should we have new ethics issues that emerge in the later part of the research, that they can go back to that original panel to engage on those. So it kind of really, I think you're right, we're trying to set up what is a critical friend rather than something to just kind of get through. And one of the lessons, again, that I didn't share earlier, is it's easy when you're going through a faceless panel to overpromise. And I have to say, I've probably done that myself in the past as well. I know they want to hear this. I'm going to say it, but is it realistic? And we've been able to be a critical friend to projects on this and saying, actually, you've committed to Māori-centred research here, doing all of these things. In this particular project, is that realistic? And so that pushback is because we know we have greater kind of, we're closer to what will be happening. So the overpromising, like, people don't get away with it. And so we're trying to say, let's be realistic and let's discuss that point, and let this not be a tick box.
Great, thank you. We've got Sarah Jane, who's reflecting on the living ethics and asking some more questions about AI. So from your experience, how can AI tools be ethically leveraged to enhance communication and representation research involving Pacific communities without reinforcing existing biases or excluding Pacific voices in the interpretation and dissemination of findings? I had thought we were stopping at 12:45. We're going until 1. So Sarah Jane, if you're there and you'd like to add anything to your question, let's see if people want to raise their hands and chat through to Deborah directly at this stage.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
I can.
Oh, great. I thought I'd just frame the question in the chat before I just was seeking your insights about the use of AI. And obviously with Pacific communities, a lot of the AI isn't input into AI yet, because it's verbal, it's communal, there's a lot of like talanoa, group work and those sorts of things. And the question of ethics with research at the same time is kind of quite compounding at the moment. Like everything seems to be running to catch up or to like integrate the use of AI and ethics to be more efficient and also to get smarter and quicker. But I'm just really curious to see from your experience, and perhaps it is similar to the collection of Māori data and AI, if there are any ways that this is happening in your space that's doing really well, or if there are any partnerships at the moment that are looking at addressing the use of AI and working with Pacific communities to kind of frame where the ethics is landing. Yeah, just curious to know from your experience. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I did attend an AI in education conference some time back, and I know there are kind of people with more expertise than me, especially at Waikato University. There was a professor that spoke in particular about the concerns around te ao Māori and te reo Māori, like almost moving to some homogenous kind of view of the world if we're using AI, because it's the way that it runs on algorithms. So there are all kinds of ethical kind of concerns. I think if we remember, and this is how we've been talking about it more recently in our centre, about it being a tool and not being, so it's something that we use with our kind of cultural knowledge with us rather than handing that over to AI. So I think that's where I saw the conversations happening amongst those that have greater expertise than I in AI. But in our centre, it's like, actually, what can we, how do we reduce, how do we get AI to do the grunt of the work that we do, but not the intellectual work that we do? And I think that will be how we will discuss it in the context of ethics. So if it's helping us kind of write reports more quickly, well, we've already decided the findings that will be culturally based and informed. In terms of qualitative analysis, I mean, that's the big one. How do we use it there? And again, I think we should we're talking about using it only to work with what we're providing it and not to kind of take us to some homogenous view of culture, language, tikanga, all of those things. I think as researchers, we need to hold on to it as a tool that gets things done more efficiently, but not to do the thinking. And yeah, that seems to be consistent with others talking about it. So I think we'll all be working through this collaboratively together. So collaborative ethics, I think having more conversations like this will be helpful for all of us as we proceed into uncharted waters.
Thanks very much, Deb. Yeah, very, very good thoughts there for us. We've got Nadine, who's put in a question about consent form. How do you handle cases where participants want to participate anonymously, which includes not signing a consent form?
Yeah. I think that's tricky. It's tricky in terms of our kind of audit, kind of our like, personal, our kind of audit of ethics within an agency. I wonder, though, whether it's about reassurances about what happens to those consent forms, or sometimes we'll have consent by audio because we're doing online interviews with communities or people in communities that don't find it easier to kind of send in advance kind of a signed paper copy. But again, it's like the anonymity part of it. I would suggest there's something around the trust with the team, with the research team that's kind of at play there, because often the assurances are we'll kind of maintain these for our kind of maintain these in our records. But there has to be a point at which you have to decide what is that form for. Are we using these forms so that we can check that members in a larger research team have genuinely received kind of consent? If it's kind of, when I'm doing a research project on my own, as many of us do when we do PhD research, you know, our personal ethics doesn't need a written form for the consent to know that somebody's consented. So I think it's always context specific. I wouldn't accept someone in my research team not having a consent form, but if I was doing research on my own. So it's around assurances that someone knows what's happened. So if you've talked through, you've ticked off the things that you need to know meet informed consent, then you might not need to have a signed version. And so I think it's been clear what informed consent is. It's do they understand the project? Do they understand it's voluntary? Do they understand that they can withdraw at any time, that they can contact you within a certain period of time to withdraw their data? So it's deciding what that is and really check in. Because if someone hasn't understood those things anyway, a signature doesn't mean anything. Signature's there for an audit that those checks have taken place. So I don't know if that's kind of the answer you wanted, but I think it's context specific. Think about why you need a signature, but more importantly, check that you've met the criteria for informed consent.
Okay, there's just perhaps before we close off a related question from Phyllis on the consent forms. Could participants agree to use a pre-agreed persona or name for the consent form?
Again, it's what do you want it for? Do you need to kind of, it's like, would essentially a pseudonym help you, somebody go back to that person to check that they did give informed consent? So we have to think what those forms are for. If they're to reassure all of the research team or to, or someone kind of later down the path when there might be denial of having given informed consent to actually prove that they did in the time, look, here's their signature. Then that may or may not help if 2 years down the line we don't know who to contact via that pseudonym. So it's really drilling down what that signature means. Does it mean they've understood? We hope so. Do we need their exact name so we can contact them again? Well, that depends on how the team we'll plan to kind of manage the data into the future, I think.
Thank you. Yes. Now we've got a few people who are already needing to dash off to their next hui and passing on their thanks to you, Deborah. Hayley, thoughtful and thought-provoking webinar. Really practical advice. So I wonder whether I can hand back to Ruth now to bring us to a close.
Kia ora, I have to turn off my mute, of course, as everyone does. So just wanted to thank particularly Deb. Deb was voluntold, perhaps, but she did consent in the end. And Deb has been away on a break and been to a conference, and she's come back and produced an amazing presentation, which I've enjoyed because I was part of that process and I was on the panel, and I just loved hearing your reflection on the process, and I recognised many parts of that process, and it was really good. I'm glad people have engaged and found it useful, so go well. And close with the karakia. Unihia, unihia, unihia ki te uru tapanui, kia wātia, kia mama, te ngākau, te tinana, te wairua te ara tākatā, koia rā e rongo whakairia ake ki ronga, kia tina, huie, pai ki e. And just in closing, I just wanted to tell you about our next presentation. The kind kōrero is by Zane Mather. He's going to give some reflections on working in rangahau aratake as tangata tiriti. So that will be a great presentation, as all of these are. And this we will let you know. The PowerPoint will be available to participants. Is that right, Deb? I'll talk through that, and then we have recorded this, which we usually share with you. So please get back in touch if you wanted to know some more details. But